Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going deep on this one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're doing a deep dive into Marcos López de Prado's tactical investment algorithms.
Okay.
And we're going to unpack how these algorithms differ from like the typical all-weather strategies
Yeah.
and what advantages they might have.
I think what's interesting about this is how de Prado really kind of shifts our focus.
Okay.
Instead of searching for that one strategy that just works in all market conditions, right?
Right. Yeah, like a silver bullet.
Exactly. Yeah, the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
He's saying, you know what, maybe we should be thinking about building a system that adapts to different market states, to different, regimes or whatever you want to call them.
So instead of trying to predict the unpredictable,
Yeah.
we should be prepared for a range of possibilities.
Exactly. Yeah, be prepared rather than predict.
Okay, I like that.
And so that's where I think this concept of the tactical algorithmic factory, or TAF, comes in.
Okay.
But before we even get into that, I think it's worth highlighting some of the challenges that de Prado points out with traditional financial modeling.
All right. All ears laid on me.
Okay, so he kind of points to two major issues.
Okay.
The first he calls the falsifiability problem,
Okay.
which is essentially that we can't rewind the market and run controlled experiments.
Right.
Like you can in a physics lab, right?
Yeah.
We only have one historical data set.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to definitively prove or disprove a financial theory.
Yeah, makes sense. So backtesting is crucial in finance because it's the closest we get to testing our theories.
Right. But even then, de Prado argues that not all backtests are created equal.
Okay.
And he goes on to discuss three types of backtesting: walk-forward resampling, and then Monte Carlo.
Gotcha.
So walk-forward is sort of the most basic one.
Okay.
It's essentially where you test an algorithm on historical data step by step.
But wouldn't that assume that history repeats itself exactly?
Exactly. And that's the big flaw with that method.
Yeah.
So resampling tries to improve on that
Okay.
by creating multiple kind of histories, by shuffling and sampling from the existing data,
Okay.
but you're still limited by that same data set.
Right.
So that's where Monte Carlo comes in.
Okay. This sounds way more complex.
It is, but it's also the most powerful.
Okay.
And Monte Carlo backtesting, what it does is it simulates data
Okay.
based on our understanding of the underlying data generating process, or DGP.
The DGP.
The DGP, yeah.
Yeah.
So instead of being constrained by what actually happened in the past, we can generate countless what-if scenarios.
So instead of rearranging the historical data, we're creating entirely new data sets based on what we know about how the market works.
Exactly. And I think this is where tactical algorithms really shine.
Okay.
So de Prado gives an example
Okay.
of a market-making algorithm that they tested using Monte Carlo simulations.
Okay.
So they modeled the market using a very specific process
Okay.
that took into account things like the arrival rate of informed versus uninformed traders.
So they created their own little virtual market to test this thing out.
Yes, exactly. And what they found was really interesting.
Okay.
Through these simulations, they discovered that the optimal strategy wasn't always intuitive. Sometimes holding on to positions even during large unrealized losses actually proved to be more profitable because of things like mean reversion.
Huh. So that kind of goes against the typical advice to cut your losses short.
Right. It depends. It depends
It all depends on the DGP.
on the specific DGP you're working with.
Gotcha.
And that's a key advantage of Monte Carlo, I think.
Okay.
It forces us to be explicit about our assumptions
Right.
and transparent about how our virtual markets work.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in the traditional backtesting methods, they're simpler,
Yeah.
but they might be obscuring some of their biases
Right.
in how they're using historical data.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, but some people might still say, well, simulations aren't as good as real-world data.
Sure.
What does de Prado say to that?
Yeah. So he argues that, historical data, while valuable, really represents only one possible outcome.
Right.
It's unlikely to repeat exactly,
Right.
whereas Monte Carlo allows us to explore a wider range of possibilities,
Okay.
including ones that haven't happened yet but are statistically plausible
Okay.
based on our understanding of the DGP.
So it's not about replacing real-world data,
Yeah.
but expanding our understanding of it by exploring different what-if scenarios.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this kind of leads into the four main advantages that he highlights of Monte Carlo backtesting.
Okay, hit me.
So first, addressing the falsifiability problem.
Okay.
Second, accounting for non-stationarity.
Okay.
Third, allowing for the inclusion of priors. And fourth, enabling unlimited backtest length.
Okay, wow, that's a lot to unpack. Let's break those down.
Okay.
So how does Monte Carlo address this falsifiability problem that we talked about?
So by explicitly defining the DGP,
Okay.
we're essentially creating a controlled environment.
Okay.
We're making our assumptions transparent and to some extent testable. It's kind of like you're constructing a mini market where you can tweak the rules
Good.
and observe how your algorithms perform.
Okay, so what about non-stationarity?
Right.
The idea that the markets are constantly changing.
Hmm.
How do we handle that with Monte Carlo?
So that's where the tactical part comes in.
Okay.
Monte Carlo allows us to create algorithms that are designed for specific market conditions, or DGPs.
Okay.
So instead of seeking one all-weather strategy,
Right.
we're building a toolbox of algorithms,
Gotcha.
each one tailored to a particular market environment.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So it's not about finding one magic formula. It's about having a flexible approach that adapts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Adapt to different market conditions.
Okay, what about the third advantage, incorporating priors?
Right. So unlike traditional backtesting, which is limited to historical data,
Yeah.
Monte Carlo allows us to integrate expert knowledge,
Okay.
economic theories, or even assumptions about future events. Things like black swan events.
Right.
So this allows us to test our algorithms against a broader range of possibilities.
So it's not just about what has happened. It's about what could happen.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then finally, Monte Carlo simulations aren't limited by the length of historical data.
Oh, that's nice.
We can run these simulations for as long as we need
That's
to achieve statistical confidence.
So no more struggling with limited data sets.
Right.
That's awesome. So far, we've covered, like, the why of Monte Carlo, but how does it actually work in practice?
Okay.
You mentioned parametric and non-parametric Monte Carlo earlier.
Right.
What's the difference?
So parametric Monte Carlo simulation uses specific mathematical equations
Okay.
to model the DGP.
Gotcha.
So you can take, for example, a regime switching model.
Okay.
This is like, imagine the market has different personalities. Each one has its own set of rules.
Okay, so the market can switch between different states, and our algorithm needs to adapt to each one.
Exactly, yeah. And we can use historical data to figure out the probabilities of these transitions and use those probabilities to simulate new data that kind of replicates the statistical properties of the real market.
Sounds pretty complex.
It can be.
So how does non-parametric Monte Carlo differ from that?
So non-parametric methods don't rely on predefined equations.
Oh,
They
yes.
learn patterns directly from the data
Okay.
using techniques like neural networks.
Ah, okay.
So instead of giving the computer a strict definition,
Yeah.
we're showing it examples and letting it kind of learn from experience.
So it's more about pattern recognition than explicit rules.
Exactly.
Okay. So what kind of techniques are used in non-parametric Monte Carlo?
There are all sorts of techniques, things like variational autoencoders, self-organizing maps, generative adversarial networks.
Wow.
These can model much more complex DGPs
Yeah.
that might not be easily represented by simple equations.
So it seems like non-parametric Monte Carlo is a really powerful tool for dealing with markets that are hard to define
Right.
with these traditional models.
Right. It can be. Yeah. And choosing between parametric and non-parametric really depends on the complexity of the DGP
Okay.
and the data that you have available.
Makes sense. So let's tie this back to the tactical algorithmic factory concept.
Okay.
How does Monte Carlo help us build this factory?
Okay, so remember, the TAF is about moving away from finding a single best algorithm
Right.
and instead building a collection of algorithms, each one optimized for a specific market condition, or DGP.
Right. So we're building a diverse toolbox instead of relying on one tool for every job.
Exactly.
So instead of trying to predict what the market will do, we're building a system that's adaptable and ready to respond
Exactly.
to different market states.
It's a very fundamental shift in thinking.
Yeah.
We're not just trading markets, we're trading algorithms. The TAF is about deploying the right algorithm at the right time.
Okay.
But this kind of raises an interesting question.
Okay.
How do we identify which DGP is active in the market at any given time?
That's a great question, because it's not like there's an indicator that flashes, DGP number 3 engaged.
Right, exactly.
So how do we navigate that in a practical sense?
Right. So that's where the analytical power of the TAF really comes in.
Okay.
De Prado suggests a multi-step process.
Okay.
First, we use Monte Carlo simulations to create a diverse library of tactical algorithms,
Okay.
each one designed for a specific DGP.
So we're essentially creating a team of specialists, each one prepared for a different market scenario.
Precisely. Then we closely observe recent market behavior
Okay.
and use statistical tests to assess which DGP is the most likely candidate
Okay.
for generating that behavior.
So we're playing a bit of a matching game, looking for the DGP whose fingerprints are all over the recent market movements?
Exactly.
Okay.
There are all sorts of statistical tests you can use for this,
Right.
like the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test, for example,
Okay.
that can help us quantify the goodness of fit
Okay.
between the observed market data and the data generated by each of our DGPs.
Sounds like a process of elimination. We rule out the DGPs that don't align with what we're seeing in the market.
Right, but here's the interesting part.
Okay.
We don't have to pick just one winner.
Okay.
The TAF framework allows for allocating risk among multiple algorithms
Okay.
based on the likelihood of each DGP being active.
So instead of betting everything on one horse, we're spreading our bets across multiple horses, each with different strengths depending on the track conditions.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
This approach creates what's called an ensemble,
Okay.
which smooths transitions between different market regimes.
Right.
It even provides the potential to profit if the market takes an unexpected turn
Mhm.
and enters a DGP that we hadn't anticipated.
So the TAF is designed to be not just adaptable, but also resilient to unforeseen events.
Exactly. And De Prado also mentions an alternative approach
Okay.
that involves creating baskets of securities that mimic the behavior of a specific DGP.
So it's like building a miniature version of the market, but one that specifically reflects the characteristics of the DGP we're interested in.
Precisely. And this allows for even more fine-tuned algorithm optimization.
Okay.
Because we can create an algorithm tailored specifically to that synthetic market
Okay.
and then deploy it in the real market when conditions align.
This whole TA-half concept really challenges the traditional view of investing. It's less about predicting the future and more about being prepared for a range of possibilities.
Right. It's about recognizing that markets are complex dynamic systems.
Yeah.
A single static model or algorithm is unlikely to capture that complexity fully.
Right.
The TAF provides a framework for embracing that complexity and turning it to our advantage.
It's like the difference between trying to navigate a jungle with only a compass and having a detailed map, survival guide, and a team of experienced trackers.
I like that.
Yeah.
It highlights the importance of adaptability, preparedness, and a deep understanding of the environment we're operating in.
Yeah, for sure. But of course, there are challenges to implementing the TF in practice.
Right.
One that comes to mind is the complexity of building and managing this library of algorithms.
Sure.
It sounds like it would require significant resources and expertise.
Yeah.
So how accessible is this approach for the average investor?
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
While the full-fledged TF concept might be more feasible for institutional investors, I think the underlying principles are valuable for anyone.
Okay.
You know, the key takeaway is understanding that markets are not static.
Right.
They evolve, and our approach to investing should evolve with them.
So it's less about having access to sophisticated technology and more about adopting a mindset of continuous learning and adaptation.
Exactly. The average investor might not be building complex Monte Carlo simulations,
Right.
but they can still benefit from understanding different market regimes
Yeah.
and adjusting their portfolio strategy accordingly.
So whether we're managing a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund or our personal retirement account, the core idea is the same, to move away from static approaches
Right.
and embrace adaptability.
That's the essence of it. And there are tools and resources increasingly available that can help investors, regardless of their level of sophistication, to apply these concepts. For example, various platforms now offer pre-built algorithms or tools for backtesting and portfolio optimization that incorporate some of the principles we've discussed.
That's encouraging. It seems like the TF, while perhaps not directly accessible to everyone in its most advanced form, is still democratizing sophisticated investment principles.
I think so.
But with any new approach, there are bound to be potential pitfalls.
Sure.
What are some things to be wary of when applying these ideas?
One potential pitfall is the temptation to over-optimize our algorithms to historical data.
Okay.
You know, if our algorithms become too specialized to a particular set of past market conditions,
Right.
they might perform poorly when those conditions change.
That makes sense. It's like training for a marathon by only running uphill.
Yeah.
You might be great at hills, but you'll struggle when you hit the flats.
Precisely to avoid this pitfall, it's crucial to design robust algorithms that can perform well across a range of potential market conditions.
Okay.
And that brings us back to the importance of the DGP.
Right. Our DGP needs to be a realistic and flexible representation of the market dynamics, not just a reflection of past data.
Exactly.
Okay.
Otherwise, our algorithms will be vulnerable to unforeseen changes.
Makes sense.
We need to constantly challenge our assumptions and refine our DGPs as new information becomes available.
Okay.
And this kind of leads to another potential pitfall,
Okay.
becoming overly reliant on complex models and algorithms.
So even with a powerful tool like the TAF, we can't just set it and forget it.
Absolutely not. Human judgment and oversight are still paramount.
Right.
We need to monitor the performance of our algorithms, understand their limitations, and be prepared to intervene when necessary.
It sounds like a delicate balance between leveraging the power of algorithms and maintaining human control and understanding.
Exactly. It's a partnership between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. The algorithms can process vast amounts of data and execute trades with speed and precision.
Right.
But it's up to us to set the strategy, interpret the results, and make sure our systems are aligned with our overall investment goals.
So even in this world of increasingly sophisticated algorithms, the human element remains essential.
Absolutely. The TA and Monte Carlo simulations are powerful tools, but they're still just tools.
Right.
It's up to us to wield them wisely and ethically.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
We can't just blindly trust the output of our algorithms, no matter how sophisticated they are.
Right.
They need to understand their underlying assumptions, their limitations, and the potential risks involved.
I completely agree. Now, having explored some of the potential pitfalls,
Right.
let's kind of shift our focus to the broader implications of the TA.
Okay.
This concept goes beyond individual investors or hedge funds. It has the potential to reshape the financial landscape as a whole.
That's an intriguing thought. In what ways do you see the TAF impacting the broader financial system?
Well, if more and more investors start adopting these principles, right, both institutional and individual,
Right.
could it lead to more stability in the markets?
That's an interesting question.
Or could it create new types of systemic risks
Right.
that we haven't even anticipated yet?
Yeah, because if everyone's kind of doing their own thing and
Right.
what if everyone is kind of on the same page and they're all adapting and they're all
Right.
being more dynamic with their portfolios? Could that lead to more stability or could it be the opposite?
It's a really tough question.
Hmm.
I mean, on the one hand, you could argue that if investors are better equipped to navigate different market conditions, right,
Right.
it could potentially reduce things like panic selling and market volatility.
Because they're prepared for.
They're prepared. They're not caught off guard.
They're not going to freak out and sell everything.
Exactly. So a more adaptable investment landscape, I think, could lead to a smoother flow of capital
Okay.
and a more resilient financial system overall.
It's like the difference between a forest that's susceptible to wildfires because it's dominated by a single species of tree
Right.
versus a forest that's more resilient because it has greater biodiversity.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, a diverse ecosystem is much better able to withstand shocks and adapt to changing conditions.
Okay, I like that.
However, there's also the flip side to consider.
Right.
As algorithms become more sophisticated and interconnected, there's the potential for new types of systemic risks to emerge.
Right. So even though individual investors might be making more informed decisions,
Right.
the overall system could become more complex and potentially more vulnerable to these unexpected events.
That's a valid concern. Imagine a scenario where many algorithms are using similar DGPs or making similar trades.
Yeah.
If those DGPs turn out to be flawed, or if the market experiences a shock that those algorithms aren't prepared for, it could trigger a cascade of selling, amplifying the market downturn.
It sounds like the TF could be both a stabilizing force and a potential source of instability, depending on how it's implemented and how the broader market evolves.
Precisely. And that's why I think it's so important to have these discussions now. To anticipate potential challenges and to think critically about how to mitigate risks as this technology continues to develop.
Yeah, it seems like transparency and collaboration will be really crucial here.
I agree.
If everyone is operating in their own silos with their own secret algorithms, it'll be much harder to anticipate and manage these systemic risks.
Absolutely. Open communication, data sharing, even regulatory oversight might be necessary to ensure that the TF and similar technologies contribute to a more stable and efficient financial system rather than creating new vulnerabilities.
It's fascinating to think about how these ideas could reshape the future of finance. We've gone from these basic backtesting methods to building virtual markets.
Right.
And now to envisioning a future where algorithms are not just tools, but strategic assets, constantly adapting to this complex and evolving financial landscape.
It's been quite a journey,
It has.
and it highlights how the field of finance is constantly evolving, pushing boundaries, challenging traditional assumptions.
Yeah.
The key, I think, is to remain curious, adaptable, and open to new ideas.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, we have.
From the technical details of Monte Carlo simulations to the broader philosophical and ethical implications of the TAF.
Right.
But before we wrap up, I'd like to pose our traditional end-of-episode thought-provoking question for our listeners.
All right, I'm ready. What have you got?
So we've talked about how the TF is about adapting to different market conditions, or DGPs.
Right.
So here's the question for our listeners. What market conditions do you think we're in right now? And what kind of algorithms might thrive in them?
That's a great one. It challenges our listeners to apply what we've discussed to the current market environment.
Exactly.
You know, are we in a period of high inflation, low growth, geopolitical uncertainty?
Right.
And what kind of DGP would best capture those dynamics?
Exactly. It's a chance for our listeners to put on their tactical algorithm designer hats and think critically about what strategies might be best suited for this particular moment in time.
And who knows, maybe they'll come up with an innovative DGP or algorithmic approach that we haven't even considered yet.
The possibilities are endless, and that's what makes this such an exciting field.
It is.
There's always more to learn, more to explore, and more to discover.
On that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
Thanks to our listeners for joining us on this exploration of tactical investment algorithms.
We hope you enjoyed the conversation and come away with a new perspective on the ever-evolving world of finance.
Until next time.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those portfolios growing.